All right, everybody, what's going on? Chris Rodriguez here from Praxis, and I am here with Ryan G from 2020. And this is a
hmm
conversation that we were planning on having on the couch in the port. But obviously, since then, the world is upside down, and we are doing our social distancing. So we were going to talk about anxiety in the church, and I'm like, wow, just this seems like just the perfect time to still have this conversation. That G's joining me here. Yeah, G, if you want to just tell everybody a little bit about you, yeah,
Sure.
what you do, what
Yeah.
you've been up to.
So, but I guess something that I do normally at the church, I'm having to do online now is I work with middle school students. Been doing that for almost I'll be 4 years in July, which is crazy to think about. And so, been doing that. Work with some amazing leaders that are in Praxis, and yeah, just working from home now.
Yeah,
trying
I
to
mean,
disciple trying to disciple people online, which is super weird.
yeah. Okay, so on Tuesday night you had your last night you had your last meeting or your first meeting
Yeah,
virtually. Tell me about how that went. Yeah.
it was fun. It was honestly like way more nerve wracking than speaking in front of people. Like recording yourself on a camera is weird. I don't know how people that are influencers or vloggers do it because
Yeah.
it's just really intimidating to like stare into a camera and feel like you're performing in front of no one. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's weird. There's
I
no
feel like
interaction, no
yeah,
feedback.
we're like learning these new skills that like 2020 already knows how to do, you know.
Yeah.
So
Every kid that's
yeah,
grown up on
but
the
no,
internet.
I'm glad it yeah. Yeah, no, I'm glad it went well, and I'm just so grateful for the way that you're figuring out ways to provide solutions to like still connect with these kids and give them Jesus. I just wanted to kind of just come out the gate and just kind of ask a few questions about just kind of your childhood, and just you as you were younger, right? This whole thing of
Mhm.
like anxiety and depression and mental health. I don't know about you, but for me, that was not something that we really talked about in a Christian house and or
Yeah.
even in my church. I'm interested to know your earliest encounters were with that.
Yeah, I think I'm more talked to like the kind of like the water I swim in or like the culture kind of like that I grew up in as far as like faith and home and school. I think, you know, again, like I'm not an expert on mental health, nor do I claim to be or have had to go through any you know, diagnosed like mental health issues. And so I'm no expert. I guess so can I speak from my experience, but growing up, I think being a third generation Asian American, kind of living in this world of like, hey, you're growing up in evangelical church, you're growing up going to private school, and you know we're in the Bay. I grew up in the Bay Area, so it's not like there's not any difference of people from different cultures or all those different things. But I think there's this expectation, especially going to a Christian private school of like, hey, your grades and your faith are connected, which is
Mm-hmm.
weird. It was unsaid, and it was
Yeah.
never like explicitly said like, hey, like, but there was always this big like weight of like, hey, like, you're Asian, you're smart, right? It's like, I don't know, like, and my parents didn't want that for me. They wanted me to grow up as like my parents grew up going to Chinese school and public school, and so they had this high expectation from my grandparents. But yeah, there was kind of like this unsaid expectation, of like you have to be a certain way or you have to yeah, your faith has to be strong or your grades have to be up. And so if you can't meet that, like there's something wrong. And so I think for me, like, even though I know my teachers, even though my parents, even though, my pastors and my youth group leaders never like wanted to put that unnecessary pressure on me, I always felt that internally of like, wow, like there's all this expectation
Mm-hmm.
um, for your faith, for your school, for the way your life looks.
Yeah.
And if it's not meeting that, like, what does that mean? Is that something wrong with everyone else, or is that you? And so I think I internalized a lot of those expectations for myself, um, and just had this kind of like an overwhelming sense of anxiety of like, or this kind of unconscious like feeling of like, am I doing enough? Like, am I not, am I missing the bar? And so there's always this weight, kind of this burden I didn't have language for, I guess, until I got older.
Yeah. So I hear you saying another thing of just like, so there's these moments and these experiences that happen and these expectation, whether they're spoken or unspoken, um, that kind of in our minds we start to create like a story, right? And there's nothing wrong with like telling ourselves a certain narrative, a certain story about, hey, this is the way the world is. This is the way I should interact with the world. This is who I should be. Um, but sometimes we start making these choices that are based off of this narrative, that are based off of this story, but that aren't necessarily the most true narrative story or the true direction where we're supposed to go, or who we are or who we should be. So as you got older and you started to get some more language, talk to me a little bit about some of that.
Like growing up in church, in a Christian home, in at a Christian school, like again, like I use language, like I was pretty privileged. Like I grew up in a great environment. There was unhealthiness there, but like I think growing up in that, um, and then going off to, doing community college, interning the church, and going off to Bible college, I was still kind of in that bubble of, those this narrative I gave myself of like you need to make this expectation for yourself, or you need to match this. And this thing of comparison came in of like looking at my life versus my friends' lives and just like not experiencing my life as it was, wishing it was something else. So I
Hmm.
think, especially when I got into, after I graduated from Bible college and like grew a lot there as an individual, like going away to college and living by myself and meeting people I've never, like moving to a state I knew no one, like that was some of those growing period for me of like I'm becoming my own person. Um, and I think in Bible college, like there was a lot of growth and health that for me individually, like that just forced me to like create a new narrative because I had no I had no
Hmm.
foundation there, so I had to create that. And so that was kind of like a
Yeah.
really growing period for me in college, especially going to as a private Bible college, but it felt more like a community than it did like not to crap on Redwood Christian, but like it just felt different than any other private school I went to. Um, and there's
Yeah.
still some
Yeah.
unhealthiness that I see now that was there of some legalism or people that hadn't dealt with their own stuff. But
Hmm.
overall, I had to grow as a as an individual, and then kind of come back home and after college, you feel the sense of like more expectation as you're like,
Hmm.
I got my degree, like, and now you have to become. You're like, now I'm a real adult. Like now I got to provide and
Uh,
being, being doing long distance dating with Amber and like really thinking about like how am I going to provide for myself and like eventually get engaged or married. And you start asking yourself those questions, and I think you always have a plan or a narrative. You tell yourself like it's going to be this way, or God's going to provide in this way. sometimes those things work out that way, but most of the time, I think there's like a sense of like accepting where you're at and learning that life is really a journey and a process that is a lot of times unpredictable. And we like to do in our minds is we like to predict the future or like regret the past, and we're not able to accept the reality of the situation and like move in the reality of what is and not like what we
Yeah.
wish it was or wish it will be. It's like living into what is happening now. And I think you can get into like present stuff more, but like I feel like that period of like after college, going through college and after college was like really having reality hit in of like, okay, like I need to rediscover something again, or like I need to figure things out because there's even more expectation, or there's different expectations when you're becoming an adult or you're finishing school.
Right.
Or
There's this kind of piece, like, we hear this, we hear the all the scriptures about, the foolish people who build their houses on the sand versus the wise builder who builds their house on the rock. And as Christians, we know that that rock is Christ. But something that we don't talk about is, as we're building our house and our framework on this rock, which is Christ, we start to experience different things, and we start to maybe have new question, or we might have ideas that maybe were a little adolescent, but now we're experiencing this new reality. Still Christ being our rock and our foundation, but maybe we need to, maybe the window's broken and it's time to replace it. Maybe it's time to, open the doorway, pull out some baseboards, because some of the building materials that we use, they aren't strong enough for these new experiences, right? And it sounds like you went to college and you experienced like, um, wow, how am I going to be a Christian as an adult on my own, right? And then you come back and you're like, now I have to I have to continue to prove myself as a new adult Christian. But just from some of our conversation, I know that that framework of having to prove yourself, it only lasted for a certain amount of time, and then some things started to change a little bit for you. I would
yeah,
love you to share some of that.
yeah. I think I said I wasn't gonna get into much of my college, but I think it's kind of important to like speak into where I am now. So like after graduating from Bible college, like you're thinking like, okay, I'm gonna be my dream, was like, hey, I'm gonna be a pastor at the church I grew up at, which is 3Crosses. Of like, hey, I grew up in the youth group there. Like I served there, I interned there. I'm gonna go away, come back, try to get a job there. And so that was the plan. That didn't work. So I was like, okay, maybe I need to expand my horizon. So I started applying to churches everywhere. Got interviews, got rejected. Like been doing this for months and months, and it was about after 6 months of nothing falling into place, and you start questioning yourself. You start questioning God of like, did I waste my time, or am I wasting my time? And like you said, like things in your house start breaking, and you're just like, God, like I'm trusting you. I thought I was doing the right thing. What in the world is something wrong with me? Is something wrong with you? Like, and that was one of the first times I've ever let myself be mad at God. I don't think I realized I was, but like it was one of the first times I distinctly remember saying, God, you don't know what you're doing. Like it was one of the first times I was like, God, I don't want to talk to you. Like I'm pissed at you because I thought this was what you wanted me to do, and I did it. And so it's like kind of that narrative we tell ourselves, like if we just do the right things, we'll get the reward. But like many times we discover in life, just because you do the right thing, or you think you're following God's calling or His will, or you think you're choosing the right thing, doesn't always mean life's going to be easy or that things will unfold the way you thought they were. And so I think that
So,
was something growing for me.
yeah, so you had your Job moment
Yeah.
where you're like, ah, man, all this bad stuff is happening. And then he starts like questioning God. And I think a lot of times we get this misconception that like, don't get angry, don't question all this stuff. What's wrong with you? Why are you questioning God? Almost like we put them in this small little thing of our God can't handle it. But you know, what we find in our life is that like when we get angry, when we begin to question, you know, God is big enough and He can handle it. You know, He's got answers for us, and they're not always the ones we want. So obviously, that's an important thing that you walk through. But then you end up after all this time, you start working at the church, and we actually start working at the church around the same time. And you step into a ministry that in a lot of ways is kind of the heartbeat of 3Crosses. There's a lot of overlap in other ministries. Like obviously my people at Praxis, most of them are volunteers there. A lot of people come up through 2020 to go on to other ministries, and it really is an important ministry for our church. And you go in and you take over, and you're doing a great job at it. And things are working. It seems like everything's growing. Like if we were to like look at it on paper, like everything is going awesome. It's not really. It's like, yo, this is the blueprint. This is the ministry we want to follow and we want to look at. Like, you know, it seems like God is blessing you, but in this moment of like God blessing you and your faithfulness and your ministry, some new things start to happen in your world, and I would love for you to share about that.
I think something that ties in to now and kind of getting the job at 3Crosses was, and just kind of like the culture of like church world and faith and home and school, was definitely like you highlight the good stuff in your life, like the blessings from God, like you show gratitude for that, but you don't show the pain. You don't deal with the hard emotions of like sadness or disappointment or stuff like that. And so I think for me, like trying to shut down those negative emotions, like from an early age to getting this job, was like you only highlight and want to feel the good emotions. And so like especially getting this job and like having success and like working, like doing the job I wanted to do, that like I went to school for, and like having to wait and then finally getting it, like you get into this like this mindset of like everything's fine, everything's great, like, but I mean, everyone always uses this example, but like for the iceberg there's something deeper, and so on the surface everything looks great, whether it's your life or your ministry or your job, but like there's so much stuff unsettled underneath. And so for me it was like after a year working at church, like I could definitely say like that became my identity. And there was, Amber and I have talked about this a lot, like there was this kind of like weird sense of like my job is who Ryan is and Ryan is his job. And there's this sense of like a lack of dependence on God, a lack of investment in my marriage, a lack of investment in my immediate family. And because of those habits and those unconscious things that I wasn't even aware of were happening, it started to pick at like the very deep wounds that I had. And, you know, eventually I started seeing things in myself, not even in my circumstances, but like internally, I started seeing cracks in myself of like, man, like I'm getting stressed. Like I'm just, okay, I got to work harder if I'm feeling stressed. I just need to work harder, work pastor, and I started to realize like, man, I'm starting to get really like feeling like I'm always tired, like I'm always feel rushed. And so I started to see like these patterns that were maybe I've always had in my life, but even being more pushed to the limit because I'm in this high demanding job as a pastor. And so
Right.
I started to see how these things that I was doing, even good things, were eating at who I was as a person and eating at my relationships and even eating like, yeah, and just like taking, I was giving more than I even had and I was even capable of. And so, eventually, um, I can get into it, but it kind of like my body broke down because like
Mm-hmm.
if you don't take care of your car, you don't change the oil, you don't rotate the tires, like eventually your car is just gonna break down and not work well, or just, yeah. And so that's kind of what I did to myself after a
Mm.
couple of years into working my job.
So probably a year prior to you having this moment, right? I had a similar moment where I was kind of just burning the candle at both ends, um, really trying to, push a lot of things for Praxis, trying to, build a business for myself and like, teach a bunch of classes at different places and all these things. And I had this moment where I broke down and it got me in, into therapy. Um, and, um, and my therapist, he talked to me about this picture of this cup. He's like, imagine you are this cup and you have energy and everything that you give, yourself to comes out of this cup. And he drew like, where are you at right now? Is your cup empty? Is your cup, halfway? Is it full? Is it overflowing? Is it broken? And I felt like, my cup's kind of empty and leaking. And I feel like I'm giving myself to all these people and, good things, but not really taking care of myself. And I hear you saying that that's something that happened to you. And like, how easy is it to fall into that trap? Like, right, in church, doing good things, but when we look at our cup, it's empty, it's low, it's maybe even broken, and we're not filling ourselves up. But we're constantly pouring out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, talk to me about like kind of like some of the ways you process through that.
Yeah. I think most times when we awaken to a problem, it's either because someone else points it out or we unfortunately are the ones that hit rock bottom and then we have to figure it out. And so I think for me this is where when I was realizing like, man, like I'm doing this job and I love it, but I don't have much more to give. And so eventually I was like, okay, like I needed to go to therapy because I was like, I had friends that had gone and like spoke well of like, hey, this like really helped me personally or helped me in my marriage. I'd always been interested, but I was like, I'll eventually do it. And I put it off for months and just said I would do it, but never was too busy. And it's like, no, I got stuff to do that are more important. But eventually I got into therapy. I think it was May of last year. It was funny because things actually got worse. My therapist said, kind of example of like you were stuffing all these clothes into your closet and all these things for most of your life, like most of your childhood, most of your adulthood has been stuffed in this closet. And now because you're actually wanting to deal with it and bring it to God and bring it to consciousness and bring awareness to it, you're slowly opening it. And eventually when I started slowly opening the closet, like crap started falling out. And so as I started to realize, man, I have a lot of hurt that and a lot of pain that I've never dealt with. Even though like I had a great childhood, I had great parents. I
Right.
I had great leaders and people in community, but I hadn't let myself feel the pain and the kind of like the disappointment that I felt towards my parents, or I felt towards myself, or towards God, or towards my friends. I never let myself actually feel that. And then when I
Right.
started to let myself feel that, I was like, oh man, like there's so much stuff in this closet that I did not know was there. And so eventually, when I was seeing my therapist, Rob, learning like, man, this is really hard. This is like too much. It almost seems like this seems counterproductive. Like to go back to things in the past or to go things currently that are difficult to actually like deal with them. Like I would rather just push through and like I'd rather just like pretend they're not there. But um, one of the best things I've ever heard was a quote from Pete Cazzaro, who's like a pastor and a writer. And he says like, the
Mhm.
greatest commandment Jesus gives us is to love God with all your heart, to love your neighbor as yourself. And you can't love God, you can't love your neighbor if you don't have a self to give. And I think for me, is like I was realizing I didn't know who I was, because I didn't let myself realize all the experiences I've gone through and let myself feel those things. So I pushed down a lot of who I was because I didn't want to feel the painful stuff and the ugly stuff. And so kind of it took me um, to like go to therapy, but actually things got started to like come out of this like all this baggage started to come out, and like
Yeah.
it culminated to like burnout and yeah, just some crazy stuff that for me like yeah
Mhm.
was just like very hard to go through.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's this, it's almost like this, this picture of, I think about, Moses when he like comes down off the mountain after receiving the commandments. And then the people, they said, oh my goodness, cover your face because, you look like God and we're afraid. And it's this picture of like what we do a lot of when it's like, hey, like I don't want I don't want my stuff to be looked in the face. So hey, just like go away. So we start pushing people off. We start not listening to like the spirit that's inside of us, and we're like, hey, nah, like nobody can look at this, not even me.
Mm.
And what it sounds like, as you said, like, no, like we're gonna look at this stuff. Like, we give the Israelites and the disciples and all these things, we give them crap for like what they, the way they responded. But like once you actually see the things as God like starts revealing the stuff to our hearts, we have a responsibility that we have to like actually do the work to deal with it, to do the
Mm.
work to grow and do the work to change, right?
Yeah.
So it's like somebody once said, when we behold the beauty of God, we start to see our ugly. And I think, I think definitely God uses the work of therapists, and for both of us, like we both have therapists that are Christians, and God uses them to give us these tools to kind of see some of the shadow parts, some of the parts that are unknown to us, that God already sees, that God already gives us an opportunity to invite Him in to help us change. But man, I wish it came in the form of I can just pray a prayer and like all the stuff goes away, right? Did that
Yeah.
happen for you?
No, I think for me, the I mean, it's so funny because in church we use the words like sanctification, resurrection, death, baptism, like salvation. But when we actually experience those, it's actually really painful. Like it's actually not this like
Yeah.
glorious like freedom. I mean, there is at the end, but I think for me, I had to let things die I let my sense of control and my sense of needing to be perceived a certain way and let those things like actually surrender those to God. And I think when we think of the word surrender, it's like, here, God, I just give this to you and you fix it. And it's like, no, like God actually makes you walk through it and experience the pain and experience the sorrow of it. And so I think for me, like part of my journey of healing and becoming more like Christ, like we say, is actually letting things die that are not of Christ. And so it's like that's the painful part. And so for me, that's like in small ways, that's been in big ways. Like we always think of like therapy as like the only way to do that, or like, or of like, you know, getting baptized, or like, you know, or like having these spiritually high moments, or these huge euphoric moments. And those happen and those do like help change us. But I think it's like, it's the more mundane, the more habitual things that we do that really helps us process through all of becoming more like Jesus and actually going through and doing the work of change. Yeah.
So, you know, there's in our conversation, like obviously both of us, we pastor, both of us are also regularly in therapy. You know, in the therapy world, we talk about tools and coping skills, right? We talk about changing narratives and new language. But in the Christian world, we have some of those same things.
Yeah.
And they're called spiritual disciplines, right? And you recently just read a couple books. You quoted one of them earlier, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and then the John Mark Comer book. I'd be interested to know, like, from your perspective, like kind of pull in some stuff from there and just like your own experience of like these coping skills, practical small things, and spiritual disciplines. What are some things that you've implemented in your life?
For me, at least, like it's one thing to read about like spiritual habits and like to learn language. It's another to actually use that and implement it. And I think like the book Emotionally Spiritually Healthy gave me a lot of language and like actual process. But like, and I think this other book of, you know, I've been reading through it, the John Mark Comer, like the elimination of hurry and how to be more present, slowing down, and all these things have been super helpful. And like listening to podcasts and like doing all those things, but like, and listening to sermons. But I think we easily as Christians think, as long as I absorb the information, it will somehow magically turn into like me doing it. But it's actually a lot harder than that. And so I think for me, like creating rhythms, I'm not a disciplined person at all. Like I'm very impulsive. I'm very moody. And so I may not show on the outside, but inside, because I'm an introvert, I internalize stuff. And so you may not see on my face, but it's going on. And so I think for me, some things that I've been implementing of disciplines of like Sabbath, like for real, like we need rest. And like if God needed a rest on a day, like I think that's showing us something that God was trying to show us, like, hey, you need this and I want to give it to you as a gift. But it's a choice. It's a choice that you get to make, but it's something that's supposed to be life-giving for you. And so for me, like I've been trying to create that on my Saturdays, just because for me, like the type of work that we do as pastors, it doesn't just stay at a space. It doesn't just stay at the church building, but our work goes with us internally, and it goes with us in our thinking and keeps us up at night. And it's like, you know, it's something that it's really weighty and a burden. And sometimes we just need rest from that. And I think college students need that too, even if they're just a student or if they're working
Right.
We need rest from our busyness and our hurry. And so for me, things are a little different now with being stuck inside.
Right.
But I think even being intentional about not just resting, as in like binge watching but actually like being present with where you're at, what you're doing, and really just be sitting with God and be like, okay, God, like I'm intentionally like being with you during this time. And there's going to be times where it's even practicing that's hard because like you're like, oh, I gotta clean something, I gotta do something. And so I've been slowly learning what Sabbath looks like, and I don't even fully got it, but like I'm trying to implement that in my regular rhythms, as hard as it is. I think too, like
Yeah.
for me, since I am an introvert, I don't know how other people process their feelings. Maybe they're better at verbalizing them, but for me, like journaling has been a huge thing, and especially journaling um, in nature, and not like I
Yeah.
have a note. I have notes in my phone that I journal in, but like actually writing down, like because often when I try to journal in my phone, it also reminds me, oh, I gotta work on this, or I gotta so like
Right.
actually paper and pen. Uh, Going to
Hmm.
there's a spot I have in Chabot that I won't tell anyone about because I don't want people to steal it. There's a couple of spots I have at Lake Chabot that I
They'll
go
go
and
find you there. Like, hey, I just thought I joined you and you're introverted.
no, yeah, don't do that. So like for me, I need it more because I am an introvert and I need to process things by myself sometimes. But I need to release those like either verbally or just writing them down on paper. It's like, oh wow, like that's what I've been feeling. So those are a couple things. There's more
No,
that I
yeah, no, we're kindred spirits in that way. It's weird, right? Because to be an introvert, but be the but have the responsibility to be someone who is constantly speaking and leading large crowds and things like that, right? Like, yeah. So I feel that struggle. In some ways, the social distances, like there's a joke, like all the introverts have, so like there's a meme like introverts have been preparing their whole life for this, you know?
yeah, life
It's
is the
like,
introvert's dream.
yeah, yeah. So anybody who hasn't read John Mark Homer, it is such a good book. And one of the things that he talks about in there, he says, it seems like Jesus is always busy, but never in a rush and
Yeah,
never in a hurry. Um, and and he points us to say, hey, like we need to try to become more like Jesus and live our life more in the rhythms that Jesus did. Um, and now I think about the time we're in right now, where literally like we can't go to school, we can't go to work. Um, you and I were told like, hey, don't come to the church unless you absolutely have to, right? Like we're forced to be home, um, and we can't go out and do all the things that normally distract us. Um, so now we have to sit in forced unhurry that we don't know how to do anything with.
yeah.
Um, for people listening, um, what are some ways that we can embrace this sit in this idea of Sabbath, this idea of not rushing, not being in a
Yeah.
hurry, in this time where we're all freaked out, we're all scared, we're all anxious, and probably feeling quite disconnected.
Yeah, I think we're all forced to use our technology more than ever, and like seeing that this is a tool, like you and I are literally talking through Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
um, but really using this to like, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, I still want to hang out with people, but we can't do that now. But using platforms like Zoom, FaceTime, like actually taking the time to spend it with people and like being intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of times, even in the Bay Area, we have this sense of like, we'll just find time to hang out with people or just find time to have time by
Right.
ourselves.
Yeah.
But actually, because we're having to stop, can we actually be intentional now about who are the people that are important in our life and
Right.
making them our priority? And I think that's something that I've been thinking about. Like, I saw that, Thea, she threw in our 2020 group chat, like, hey, we're watching a movie together. And that's a simple way of like, let's
Right.
be communal people, even if it's as simple as watching a
Right.
movie. But instead of watching a movie by yourself, like, hey, let's make this a communal thing. Like, and maybe the movie will be super choppy and not well streamable, but
Right.
it's like, that's not the point. It's like, I'm spending it with people. Or I think about like now, you have more time than ever to like read a book, to journal,
Mm-hmm.
to like do something you love, pick up things that you love to do. I think a big temptation now is just to veg and to kind of like numb ourselves to
Mm-hmm.
the chaos that's going on. And I think that's actually going to be really detrimental. So actually like taking this time to like check on your neighbors, like
Mm-hmm.
get to like, even though we can't really like hang out, like knock on the door or like send them a note, or
Yeah.
we have a neighbor that's kind of down the way, and she's elderly, and like Amber talked to her for 45 minutes yesterday, and people have been checking on her, and like this is an awesome opportunity to be intentional about our time and really process like our priorities and to create these habits that we can take into like a normal life when that happens, because
Mm-hmm.
nothing's normal right now. And so it's like prioritizing what's important, our relationships, the things we love, um, and really like, yeah, taking this time to actually sit with God and be present with him, like knowing that he wants to be with us during this time.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think John Mark Comer talks about this. It's oftentimes that, we are going past God. Like the reason why we feel disconnected to God is because we've gone past him. We've moved forward, and God's been sitting there waiting to be with us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's oftentimes
Mm-hmm.
we're the ones that are disconnected from him and not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for us, like really
Mm-hmm.
sitting down and like, okay, let's connect with God, with ourselves, and with people during this time.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and this is after Jesus was crucified and he resurrects, and they didn't know it, and they're talking, and they're worried, and they're like, "What the heck is going on?"
Yeah.
And Jesus, who they didn't recognize, is like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Don't you know what happened?
It's
Like,
the best story.
are you like, like what rock have you been under? Like, you know?" And then he talks to them, and he like tells them the scripture, and then he moves along and goes somewhere else, and they say, "Did our hearts not burn within us when he spoke?" And isn't that like our condition, like all the time? We're like, "Hey, you don't know what's going on, Jesus," and then he opens us up with his words, and it's like, wow, like, man, didn't those words burn in us? I think in these moments, in these times, we have this opportunity um, to really sit with each other, um, and using technology as a tool to connect, not as a tool to numb, like you were saying,
Mm.
but then also sit with Jesus, and just kind of be with him. So yeah, no, I'm really grateful for you taking some time to share what's going on, and what's just kind of your perspective with us. I know it's going to be greatly helpful for our community, Ryan, and yeah, man. Looking forward to doing some more of these. I I'll be praying for you and thinking about you and your and just in 2020 that you kind of continue to find creative tools and solutions for kids to know that they're loved and connected. Thanks for your time, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening.
Bye, guys.